Hi everybody, my name is David Zeffman. I'm head of the gambling practice at the global law firm CMS. Welcome to this session, which is all about the funding of football with a particular focus on sponsorship. Although you can only see at the moment two of my fellow panelists, that's because Russ Yershon, who was on with us a few minutes ago, is having some technical problems. I'm sure he's going to join us in a second. Also, unfortunately, Bill Mummery has had to pull out earlier today, but I am joined by Cassandra Matilda Fernandez, Dean Akinyobi, and Russ Yershon, who I hope will be back on very soon. First, I'm going to hand over to Cassandra, and if you could just give a little introduction to yourself and your background, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much, David. I'm really glad to be here. So I work at GLMS. It's the Global Lottery Monitoring System, which is basically the sport integrity body for lotteries worldwide. I am the legal officer and project manager here. And before that, I worked at the Council of Europe, which you may or may not know had adopted the only international legally binding instrument on combating manipulations of sports competitions. So I worked specifically in that domain for the last few years. And in general, I am a sports law jurist, having studied in the UK and France and the US. And possibly a little related to this topic, I am also a football coach and I play as well. And I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, thanks, Cassandra. Dean, over to you.
Yes, Dean Akinyobi, CEO of Football Media. Football Media is a digital advertising and sponsorship agency. We help brands to activate their sponsorships across digital. A number of brands we work with include a number of brands in the Premier League, sponsors of various Premier League clubs. We have our own owned and operated network, fan sites, and affiliated digital channels that reach around 41 million to global unique users on a monthly basis. So we help strategize their sponsorship and their activations of the digital channel to extend reach, really fully engage with fan audiences. On the other side of things we do, we also create sponsorship opportunities for brands as well, with clubs and with our partner channels across broadcast as well. We operate globally, so we have a huge global reach of partners and also fan sites and social channels where these activations take place.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Russ, pleased you managed to rejoin us. Well in time to introduce yourself, please.
Brilliant. Thanks, David, Cassandra, Dean. Hi, guys. I'm Russ Yershon. I've been in sports betting marketing for over 10 years. The majority of the roles that I've had have been working on betting partnerships, sponsorships, and leveraging and maximizing them. From my time at Coral, we worked with quite a few football clubs and also horse racing sponsorships as well. 4 years ago, I set up Connecting Brands with the key USP of being a bespoke and small agency that works with brands activating their partnerships with clubs. Something that I'm really passionate about and have seen over the years is that I don't think that brands really activate well. And it's something that from day one when I joined Coral, activation was really key to making a sponsorship work. So we work with lots of brands, helping them with their strategy to really activate and use all the rights they have with their agreement with football clubs to deliver and maximize a return on investment. Elsewhere, we also look at brand ambassadors, which has become really big over the last few years, where the ex-footballer or ex-sportsman becomes the ambassador of the brand and helps give credibility to them, especially if they're new players to the market. And also they add great content as well. So rather than keep selling sign-up offers, the ambassador can really give some great content and insight, which the users really like.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So this session's about sponsorship of football by betting companies, but that's really a subset of the wider issue of the relationship between gambling and sport. And I'm sure probably all of you watching today will be aware that there's been a real swing of the moral pendulum in the UK and most of the rest of Europe over the last few years, with increasing concern on the part of governments, regulators, and the public about the harmful effects of gambling. The UK Gambling Act 2005, which came into force in 2007, was at that time one of the more liberal pieces of gambling legislation, certainly as far as Europe is concerned. But increasing concern about the harm caused by gambling has led to the UK Gambling Commission progressively tightening its regulation so that it's now regarded as having one of the toughest regulatory frameworks of any country. And the government will shortly be starting a review of that legislation, and that's only going to head in one direction. So probably the catalyst for that in the UK was that the 2005 legislation opened up gambling advertising, which previously had been relatively restricted. And that led to a vast increase in the amount of advertising for gambling companies on TV, online, and which is obviously what we're here to talk about today, in the advertising and sponsorship of sport. So there's always been a very close relationship between betting and sport. And in this country, that has its origins in horse racing and greyhound racing, where there doesn't seem to be any concern at all about bookmaker advertising or sponsorship. However, the last 10 years or so has seen football, and the Premier League in particular, become the most watched football league in the world. And over the same period, betting on football has exploded. And like any company trying to attract customers and build their brand, bookmakers increasingly have advertised on TV before and during football matches, likewise online, on advertising hoardings in football grounds, and of course started to sponsor football teams, whether that be shirt sponsorship or being a betting partner. So that's led to the situation where 8 of the 20 Premier League clubs have betting shirt sponsors, and 5 of the other 12 have betting partners. Also, of those 8 shirt sponsors, 6 are Asian-facing bookmakers who have no interest in UK punters, but are actually targeting Asian customers watching the Premier League. But it's the vast amount of gambling advertising on which the UK gambling industry spends about £1.5 billion a year, which has intensified the focus on gambling. And sport, and football in particular's relationship with gambling, has got caught in the crossfire and looks like it might be the casualty. So although, as far as I'm aware, there's no firm evidence linking sports advertising and sponsorship to problem gambling, that link has nevertheless been assumed by many, as well as being believed to contribute to the normalization of gambling in the eyes of children, and thus increasing their propensity to become problem gamblers. All of this has led to a groundswell against gambling advertising, with the consequence that bookmakers in the UK agreed to a so-called whistle-to-whistle ban on advertising on matches broadcast before the 9 p.m. watershed. And the House of Lords report into gambling, being the most influential of the blizzard of inquiries that we've had into the UK gambling industry, recommended in July that gambling operators should no longer be allowed to advertise on the shirts of sports teams or any other part of their kit. There should be no gambling advertising in or near any sports grounds or sports venues, including sports programs. And then only last week, Carolyn Harris, who's a Labour MP who's been in the vanguard of anti-gambling campaigners, said the evidence is there to show that advertising in sports, primarily football, is causing a problem for a generation of children. And as I said at the beginning, this isn't, well, I've been talking about the UK. This isn't just an issue in the UK. So last year, Italy banned gambling advertising, although there's still a bit of it that goes on. And the Spanish government is intending to do the same in Spain, including in particular banning sports sponsorship. So that's probably enough for me for the moment. Now, Cassandra, your organization has published a report on betting sponsorship of football across Europe, and I think you were one of the main authors of that report. So perhaps you can give us a bit of an overview of the situation across Europe. And also, I think it would be interesting to hear some of the recommendations that report has come up with, particularly as it relates to Asian-facing operators.
Thanks, David. Yes, well, the study was the first time that GLMS produced an in-depth study on a topic, and this is a very topical subject. It was done with a number of our members as well, and so on. So, as you may or may not know, GLMS is a non-profit association, and its main membership is a lottery. So what we did was that over the last few years with our members, but also with our monitoring hubs that are based in, across the world, in Hong Kong, in Denmark, and now in Canada as well, we did some research on what and saw that some studies showed that there's a link between illegal betting and problem gambling. So we looked at this, and then we saw that, well, the relationship between betting operators and sports teams, athletes, and events has grown even stronger over the last decade, and it has resulted in the need to ensure, for the sake of the integrity of the sporting actor or competition, that the operator is properly is operating with proper legislation. The vision and mission of GLMS overall has always been to safeguard sport integrity by developing a culture of integrity and social responsibility through various activities. So one of the activities being detecting suspicious betting patterns, and it includes advising regulators as to what provisions need to be introduced when it comes to legalizing sports betting and protecting the sports values and sustainable market influence. So basically, the study aims to bring awareness to the scope and the scale of betting sponsorship in sport, and illustrate how some betting operators exploit these partnerships with sports teams to market to customers in jurisdictions where most online betting is illegal, or where the national jurisdiction practices prohibition in terms that we tend to use in the lottery world. So the study absolutely does not say that betting on sports competitions is a negative trend. It is just that it's necessary to ensure that the measures are implemented to mitigate the risks that could flow from illegal criminal exploitation, such as match fixing, which is one of the areas in which GLMS works most in. Its main objective to protect integrity of sports from criminal infiltration and match fixing. And when we do mention about there is a particular focus on Asian-facing betting operators, where we do mention that they could tend to leverage on their association with respected sports teams to legitimize their product and target customers in Asia, and where, of course, as it's no secret to any of you, where European football, UK football, and betting are very, very popular. So what we did is we went through that. We showed a few statistics, not just in football, but also in a couple of other sports, like basketball. And we explored the existing regulations and legislations addressing betting sponsorship sports, including touching very lightly upon quickly upon the recent UK House of Lords report, which addressed this and which you mentioned earlier, I think. And then, yes, we have a number of recommendations. The baseline of these recommendations is to encourage due diligence, so that the club know basically who they're getting into business with, that they do the proper due diligence, the research behind who their potential sponsors are, and basically facilitating safe practice of sponsorship of sports. I'm not going to list them because there are a few. I could touch upon a couple of them eventually, but yeah. So that's the basis of the report, the study, which is not very long, but I don't want to monopolize the time.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. Russ, I think you've been involved with Asian-facing brands in the past. I mean, would you support Cassandra's recommendation that Asian-facing bookmakers shouldn't be allowed to sponsor football teams, or actually more generally, that bookmakers who aren't licensed in the country where the football team is based shouldn't be able to sponsor?
Yeah,
Sure.
thanks. Sorry, I will jump in before Russ says something.
Yeah, no, go on.
Sorry, thanks, David, for clarifying, because that the first thing you said is not what the study actually recommends. It does not recommend banning operators, but thank you for the precision,
Yeah.
because that's where,
Okay.
Cool.
sorry,
Yeah,
Russ.
no problem, Cassandra. Thanks, David. Look, Asian betting brands, in order for them to partner with Premier League football club, whether it's on the shirt, a sleeve, or to be a partner, they must have a UK license. So I 100% think that Asian brands that do have a UK license, they fully adhere to the regulations, can be a shirt sponsor of a football club. They can be a betting partner. So that 100% should still continue. In terms of the Asian betting brands that I've worked for before, yes, you're right. Look, the UK isn't the fundamental reason for them to be on the shirt. It is to take advantage of the millions and millions of Asian fans watching in Asia and also around the world. In terms of the activations that we do, or that I've done for Asian brands, it is to bring the Asian fans closer to the Premier League club and the sports stars themselves. So yes, the brand will be on the shirt, and yes, the brand will have a lot of branding in and around the broadcast arc when fans are watching. But in terms of the content created, it's really delivering some great content with the players that is then sent to Asia, so that they can really feel that they're closer to the players, given that they get this unique content.
And thank you, Russ. Dean, what's your reaction, I guess, more generally to the idea that betting sponsorship of football is a bad thing and is liable to increase problem gambling?
Well, I think looking at the research that Cassandra's company is creating, I think the key things I take from that is the latter point of understanding who your sponsors are. So I think the due diligence process is very important, because I guess we won't mention names, but we've all seen some certain betting companies sponsor a few teams, and all of a sudden they had to stop, and it was around due diligence issues. So I agree with that point. I think that there's a place for sports betting and sponsorship in football. I think that the fact of the matter is responsible gambling really needs to be at the forefront of everything that is promoted in order for this to be sustainable. And I think in the past that the mistakes will just happen in the past, whereby the industry was just almost self-regulating and not having the kind of like buy-in from, the wider Premier League, the government. I think that we're now kind of in a reactive process whereby laws and regulations are being enforced upon the actual industry. But whereas if we had seen in hindsight to work as an industry, to actually come together and say, okay, this is what's on the agenda. Let's actually get all of our, our ducks in a row and actually present a case whereby it's a uniform, really integrated piece that can actually be sustainable. Because I think that the whole responsible gambling, just having the strip on your advertising, I think it needs to go much further beyond that. So holistically, I think that there is a place for gambling because it has a huge amount of revenue for clubs. It contributes huge amounts of tax as well. We're all going through a certain crisis at the moment, and people will be looking at the industry and the holes that it creates. But with regards to problem gambling and addiction, I think the fact of the matter is that the industry as a whole would need to take a lot of responsibility for that. And if there's stats that actually and research that actually there is a link between that, it doesn't mean that you should do a blanket ban on an entire industry. I think it's down to like getting the industry to come together and educate the wider public, not just say, hey, just gamble responsibly. Let's go deeper than that. It really has to be embraced. So that's where I think the opportunity, unfortunately, was missed because we just, as an industry, were a bit complacent, just thinking that governments around the world would not, at some point enforce essentially draconian type regulation saying. So, with regards to the Asian topic, I think looking at the Asian brands, I agree with Russ on the fact that if you've got a license, which they all have to, because in order to sponsor a team, you would need to have a license, but then they should be beholden to the authorities in the countries that they're taking customers from. So they'd have to have their own, the clubs to do their own due diligence. But if an Asian bookmaker is taking players from Asia, the fact that they've seen a Premier League shirt sponsor, but that's the responsibility of them in their particular jurisdiction. So my own view is it has to be a holistic approach. I don't think it should be a blanket ban. There should be much more of a collaborative approach between clubs, associations, and media companies, the whole mixed charities, and then you have a uniform approach and not just a siloed-based responsible tone of voices, so to speak.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a bit, particularly as Bill, unfortunately, isn't on the panel. As I understand it, the sort of like the thrust of your recommendations is ultimately to protect the integrity of sport.
And the consumer.
Sorry?
And the consumer, yes.
And the consumer. But I mean, I think to say that the integrity of sport is threatened by having a bookmaker sponsor who isn't licensed in the country of where the team is based, I think is quite a big leap, because what you're therefore implying is that bookmaker not licensed in the relevant country is therefore somehow going to be involved in compromising the integrity of the sport. And it's the sort of link that some people make between unlicensed bookmakers, and therefore they've got some incentive to fix the result of the match. And do you have any sort of evidence when you were producing the report of any link between bookmakers and matches being fixed effectively?
The first thing I'd say is that it's a question of understanding and education. There is at no time, in any way in the domains that I've worked with, and especially with GLMS, where we say that just because you're not licensed in the jurisdiction where you're offering a bet means that you are necessarily trying to fix the match. It's just that it's harder to follow, and basically there is what we've seen with match. I'll change the direction a little to not fall into this into too much conflict here. But what we see with match fixing has to do in general with criminal organization or a person taking advantage of something that doesn't have any rules. They take advantage of a space that they can work with, that leaves them free to an extent. And there are already many countries in Europe that have this legislation in place, where you need to have a license in the country where you want to offer the bet, so that you are licensed. Whether or not the operators are still operating there, that is another question to be tackled. With the study, what we're saying, and especially one of the biggest recommendations, is to ensure that when you have an appropriate license, or you pay tax in that jurisdiction, you do not offer mirror websites, you should be allowed to enter into sponsorships, for example, within that same jurisdiction. This is one of our big recommendations. When you don't have any sort of regulation or control over that, then it makes it a little harder because there are so many facets that are involved in match fixing. This is only one of them, which I think is also quite often not something we don't realize, that this is just one facet when you're talking about the betting operators. Unlicensed operators, they don't, and they when you operate illegally, there's no control over the betting operation. That's what makes it harder. It by no means says, neither the study nor this GLMS say that actually, nor in general in this domain. When I worked on the convention that I mentioned earlier, does it say that it's automatically linked to match fixing? There's just a higher level of vulnerability. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think so. Thank you. So changing tack slightly, Dean, when you answered the last question, you were talking about the money that betting sponsorships generate for football clubs. And I think, when people talk about football, certainly, in the UK, you think of the enormously rich Premier League clubs. And I think it's true for them that, a betting sponsorship is, icing on the cake, if even that. But if betting sponsorships were outlawed, as the House of Lords report recommends, isn't that going to really harm some of the clubs outside of the Premier League, for whom bookmaker income is actually a key source of revenue, particularly given the impact on COVID over the last few months on football finances?
Absolutely. I think looking at the impact that it will have on clubs outside the Premier League will actually be potentially catastrophic, because some of these betting partners and sponsors are the kind of like the key revenue line guaranteed every season. I think that it will be a ripple effect from the Premier League downwards, because what we'll have is that massive, huge gap in finances, which will have a ripple effect on essentially player recruitment, staff recruitment. It will have a huge effect on the whole functioning of the clubs. I mean, even if you look at the lower league as well, the National League as well, I mean, they have a betting partner there. So take that out, and what impact does that have on the National League, which is obviously a semi-professional league? So I think that it really needs to be thought through, because the impact that clubs are going through right now with regards to COVID and lack of fans in stadiums, and we hear about the big picture project 1 minute, and then we hear about the European Super League, and there's so many things that are really clubs are under a lot of pressure. I think that you have to take a step back and realize that these clubs are actually a real core part of these communities. And yes, when some of these regulators are looking at protecting consumers, but if these communities and clubs aren't there anymore, then what does that? It destroys a complete industry, but it takes the heart out of the community. Some of these clubs are literally be disabled part of a community, bringing people together. So there's a big wider piece here. So that the finances would be impacted. Would just be absolutely huge. And
yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. You know, the regulators, the government is looking to protect consumers, but actually the people who are going to be ultimately hurt by this are the consumers, the sports fans, and actually the gambling companies may not be that much affected, which actually leads on to my next question, which I'll put to you, Russ, is that, you know, as I said in my introduction, bookmakers voluntarily agreed to a whistle-to-whistle ban. GVC, one of the biggest bookmaker groups, ended all of their shirt sponsorship and perimeter advertising unilaterally. But actually, can you argue that for the larger bookmakers, they'd be quite happy not to have this arms race where they compete with each other, spending millions of pounds to buy TV advertising and sponsorship? Because actually, without it, all of that advertising and sponsorship, not only are they better off financially, but it also makes it much harder for new entrants and smaller bookmakers to eat into their market share.
Yeah, great point, David. I do 100% agree with that. From being at Coral and obviously in the sports betting marketing world for the past decade, I've seen the hugely aggressive approach to acquisition that Coral, Ladbrokes, William Hill, Paddy Power, Betfair have made. So for GVC to come out like that and say that they're going to stop shirt sponsorship, it does make sense because they've really had a strong go at driving as much acquisition as they can using shirt sponsorship, plus also the other sponsorships they have in horse racing. Obviously, Coral are the partner of the Breakfast Show, which again is not cheap on TalkSport. They do a lot in rugby league as well. So between them, obviously everything that Paddy Power have done, Betfair have done, obviously, and not forgetting William Hill, they've really creamed the market in terms of driving as many new accounts as they have. So they've now got millions of UK customers that they can now target, looking at retention and reactivation, where you're absolutely right. They can save money now, not investing in football that is arguably the most expensive place to purchase sponsorship. Horse racing is significantly cheaper. Arguably, horse racing is more effective than football if you're just a UK bookmaker. So that 100% makes sense. And just touching on a point before, I think the UK is one of the most tightly regulated is basically the most tightly legislated in the world, and I think in terms of customer protection, it's significantly strong. And you look at all the bookmaker advertising that goes on now; every single piece of advertising promotes safer gambling, be gambler aware, when the funds stop. So I think as working for brands that are in the UK market, the 100% aim is safer gambling, to stop problem gambling, and obviously to engage with the user on a level where, again, everything is protected. Now you've got obviously GamCare, the significant investment behind the scenes at UK bookmakers themselves hasn't been as stronger than I've seen it for many a year.
Okay, thank you for that. Dean, sort of continuing the same thing, but actually changing country to the other side of the Atlantic. As you'll all know, in the US, sports betting has only recently been allowed to operate again, and a number of states have started permitting sports betting. And there seems to be a completely different attitude in the States, where betting is seen as enhancing the fans' experience of the sport, and it leads to sort of greater fan engagement. And I mean, I think we all know sort of like US sports fans tend to be obsessed with statistics anyway, and that obviously ties in very neatly with betting. So do you think the US has got it right? Or is it just because that they are at an earlier stage of development, and in a few years' time, their regulatory pendulum will swing the other way and they'll be imposing restrictions like we have here?
I agree. I think the US, if you look at the market and the fact that their sports are all around their audience, highly engaged with stats, betting industry, it's almost a perfect marriage. Where the US are with regards to embracing betting, it's at such an early stage. So it's something that will continue, but at some point, I believe that there will be some regulatory issues that the industry faces in the US, maybe on a state-by-state basis, because it's just what usually happens is whatever usually happens in the US usually mirrors in the UK, but we've had the experience of having this experience in the UK and then mirroring what's happening in the US. And I believe that it'll be a long period of time before it does happen, but it's a natural flow, I think, in all of these emerging markets. We'll reach a stage whereby it just becomes a normal part of society and consumer behavior, and then governments will start to look into things. There'll be more research and analysis and looking what's happened across the pond and what's learnings, and people we've been moving from different parts of the world to these different parts of the world where these emerging markets are happening. Eventually, it will be there'll be some regulations in the US and other emerging markets, but hopefully the learnings that they've seen what just happened in Europe, they can maybe do things in a way that is a bit more a bit more friendly to the market and understanding what's happened in parts of the world whereby betting has been going for such a long period of time. But it's a huge opportunity for the US and many other emerging markets. But it will last for a long period of time as it is. But it definitely, I believe that eventually you will start to see regulation on a state-by-state basis. It just then realizing who.
Okay. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask one last question for each of the three of you to reply to. So I'm quoting Richard Flint, who was the CEO of Skybet and is now back on the board of Flutter as a non-exec director, and I think one of the, certainly from my point of view, one of the most intelligent and thoughtful gambling executives. So he said, pragmatically, it would be good if we can reduce the volume of gambling companies' sports advertising. But he also said, I do think, assuming a company is properly regulated and behaving the right way, and we've got the affordability checks in place, sport is so intrinsic to gambling that there should be an advertising relationship there. So question for each of you, and you haven't got very long to answer it, is do you agree? I'm going to start with you, Russ.
Yeah, 100%. It is intrinsic. You look at horse racing, you look at darts. I think over 90% of the sponsorship money comes through betting. So if it wasn't for the betting industry, horse racing and darts, I think you can pretty much forget it. Obviously, football not so intrinsically needs all of the betting cash, but yeah, they're 100% aligned. And yeah, look, Richard is 100% right. Obviously, one thing on Skybet and the job that obviously they've done, they have really targeted the recreational customer well. The whole product that they have is really looking at a high margin for themselves. And look, again, you have to say hats off to them, because the way they do it over the last 4 or 5 years, obviously having the branding on Sky as well, it's a phenomenal job. Rich has done a great job.
Thanks, Russ. Dean, your answer.
Yes, I would say betting and sports are, yes, there's an intrinsic link. There's naturally, the two marry together. I mean, it's been in history since I don't know, God knows, Roman times. I'm sure people are placing bets, but ultimately the industry is evolving and moving forward. And ultimately, I think that you take Skybet example, and Russell's give a good analogy of their product. But I believe that sports and betting, they're not something that you can literally just disassociate from each other. It's been around for such a long period of time, and regulation is something that is going to be there. But I believe that just having it's almost a tripartite type of agreement and saying, right, we're all in this to achieve something, and how do we achieve it together? But whereas if you go off in a tangent, the House of Lords, this regulatory body, these betting companies, and it just becomes fragmented and no one achieves anything. All you achieve is bans and potentially loss of revenue for football clubs and loss of jobs potentially as well.
Okay,
so
Dean, thank you.
Makes sense.
I'm going to have to stop you there and give the last word to Cassandra.
Yes, well, I'll keep it short. I tend to agree with this statement because well, the lotteries are betting, even though they're lottery associations and usually state, but they do have their raison d'être, so to say, is to contribute very much to the development of sports and grassroots sports. So for me, it's basically a case of with globalization and so on, being careful, and that's why we need some regulations to be able to mitigate the risks and have adequate measures to safeguard all the stakeholders, the consumer, and the sport itself, especially now when things are so uncertain in the middle of COVID. I'll keep it short, just that.
Okay, thank you very much, Cassandra. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Russ. We've now run out of time. One of the disadvantages of virtual conferences is that I'm sure if we were all present together with our audience, you would be receiving thunderous applause. So we're just going to have to assume that you've got a standing ovation, and thank you on my behalf and on behalf of all of the audience for your contributions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.